Sitting and had the great opportunity to be in a room like this, people were asking the question, what is education for? And I was just reminded about how lucky I feel. Because I still remember in 1984, I was a kid who had never traveled outside of India. I had grown up in that country, and in 1984, I was lucky to get from MIT this wonderful letter that said, "You've been admitted." And even more importantly, there was 3 paragraphs down a section that said, "And you got a fellowship." Because if I hadn't gotten that fellowship, being admitted would have meant nothing. So here I am, many, many years later, a great recipient of what a great education can provide. Because if someone had told me that, can you dream one day that you would be dean of Harvard Business School, I don't think I could have even dreamt that. So for me, education has been the realization of something that I could not have even dreamt of. And that's what education provides. So for all of us who care about education, we should always remember that the real thing that education ultimately does is that it opens up opportunities for people in ways that they can scarcely imagine. That's the real goal of education, and we can do that for children, and we can do that at graduate school, and we can do that at any level, but at least I wanted to be very clear that when I think about what it is that a great education does, at its core, that's what it does. It opens up opportunities that are just remarkable for people in the world. So here I am. Today is literally a year after being announced as Dean of Harvard Business School. There's got to be a clicker.
There it is.
And it's an interesting school to become Dean of, because I remember when I graduated from MIT, I had this great choice. I had this choice of going to teach at Stanford or going to teach at Harvard Business School. And Anna Lee will know, because we had a common advisor, that all of my advisors at MIT told me that I should go to Stanford. This little place up the river has never been something that people at MIT have felt that good about. I remember calling home, and my parents thought that I needed a lobotomy. Because for those of you who know, the reputation of a place like Harvard only increases exponentially the farther away you are from Boston. So here I was, having grown up in India. People said, "You got to be kidding me! You're not going to go to Harvard Business School. That must be the craziest thing that you ever imagined." So we're a long-established business school, 100 years old. And as I've heard stories from people today, I'm deeply inspired by all these new institutions that are being created to imagine very differently what education might be. But I have, on the one hand, that choice, which is I can sit down and imagine from scratch what an institution might look like. It's very hard to escape the fact that you stand there with a 100-year history, an institution that just celebrated in just 2 years ago its 100th year in its history. So when you think of Harvard Business School, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Rich. Okay, what other words? Come on. Case study, right? Case study. That's the other word that comes to mind. Other words? Elite. Other words? I'm sorry?
Asian students.
Asian students. That's interesting that you would think about that just because it's me. Leadership, right?
Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers. So that's the range of things that you have. That people rich, sometimes rich in ways that you shouldn't feel proud of. But the method that, if you think about what the contribution of Harvard Business School has been to pedagogy, it is very much the case method. When you think about a word association that you do with Harvard Business School, the word association that most commonly comes up is the case method. So that's the history of the school. That's our great creation. It's the great product that we have, and it has served us remarkably well for a very long period of time. Now, people somehow think that Harvard Business School was born with the case method. Do you know when the first case was taught at Harvard Business School? The school was created in 1909. When was the first case in your mind? When would you guess that the first case was taught at Harvard Business School? 1929 was when the first case was taught at Harvard Business School. So it took us 20 years to even develop what we have now become synonymous with. So I just use that as an example to say that innovation can be a long time coming. It's not like they emerge and are born in kind of in a moment and then stay with us forever. You have to struggle with these things. You introduce them. It takes a long time for these things to become a matter of course, and people understand that as now being, of course, synonymous with Harvard Business School. But, having inherited the case method, the question that I have been asking myself is, what can we do for our next 100 years? We have in some ways been great beneficiaries of this legacy of innovation that we inherited in the 20th century. Yes. But is there something that is similar that we could create that would be just as powerful as the case method is for this next century in education? That's the question, at least, that I have asked myself since I became dean, because it feels like an appropriate question to ask yourself as you begin the second 100 years of a great institution, as the 10th dean of that institution. So the school that I inherited is in a very good place. So it's not like there's any desperate need to innovate. The program is very strong. We have a pretty remarkable application pool. 10,000 people apply for every 900 seats that we can give them. We have a 90% yield. So everybody whom we admit comes. It's not like we ever lose a person whom we really admit. Our students all get placed, and we've proven that irrespective of what the economic climate is. So if you think about it, people would say, you have something great going. Just keep it going. Why even bother trying to introduce something new? Because it's not like the system doesn't have innovation built into it. There's a natural engine of innovation built into the case method. Each year, we roughly write 300 new cases. So it's not like the system doesn't change. It changes because you just write 300 new cases. Every now and then, we introduce a new course. So roughly every decade, if you came to Harvard Business School, you'd see a new course in our first-year curriculum. In our second-year curriculum, there's always new courses being developed. We have roughly 100 plus electives in our second year. And that's a constant engine of creativity in the second year. So it's not like there isn't innovation going on at the school. And every now and then, we have some remarkable faculty members who become household names, whether it's Mike Porter or Clay Christensen or Bob Kaplan. So we have this. And you think about these people today, and people always ask me, well, where will the next generation come from? Well, they always come. I can assure you that at a place like Harvard Business School, there will be, for the next generation, another 5 or 6 like this, because if you look at the history of the school, there was Ted Levitt, and there were, when people like him were running the school, people were saying, where would the next Ted Levitts come from? And we had Mike Porter, and we had Clay Christensen. So in some ways, the school has this extraordinary and enviable position where innovation is not something that we feel is missing. It's there all the time, and it occurs as a natural part of the ecology. So should one have the aspiration of doing anything more? That's the question that I have. By the way, if you think about the case method, why do you think the case method has been so strong? We did a survey. One of my colleagues went out and studied the state of MBA education. More than 90% of the schools anywhere in the world use at least some form of the case method. Right, so even the University of Chicago, which people often think of as being the most different school from us, is the largest user of the case method. They're the single largest buyer of cases of Harvard Business School. Okay? So it's quite extraordinary that even places that think of themselves as being very different from us are still in very deep ways influenced. Like last year, we distributed 6 million cases worldwide. So it's a pretty powerful method that has had great impact around. Why do you think it's been so enduring? What's the power of the case method? Come on. I got to teach by cases. This is the only way I know how to do this stuff. They're great stories. Okay. What else? It's close to life, right? So the genius of a Harvard Business School case method was that it was a real problem being confronted by a real manager in the field. You had to go out, you had to study that problem, and you had to capture it in 10 or 12 pages and bring it back to the students. So it's all real problems confronted by real managers in life. What else? Yes?
That you engaged in people's emotional responses, not just some kind of facts.
Yeah, so you have a class, it's 90 students, and the standard way in which a case method discussion is opened is, Juan, if you were in the protagonist's shoes, what would you do? Right? That's the classic opening of any case method discussion, and that's how the conversation goes. And so it deeply engages people who may have different readings of a piece of material. It encourages them to think very hard about why they think differently from their colleagues. They come up with different answers. And through the process of this debate led by a skilled case teacher, in the end, you will both learn something about the case, but you may also learn why did I think differently from Kurt, or why did I think differently from Joel, and what does that tell me, and was I wrong, or is it just that we had a difference of opinion? Now, by the way, if you do this over 500 times, which is what we have students do, what do you think happens to the student at the end of 500 iterations of the case method? So that's all we do, right? So you come to Harvard Business School, and in 2 years, at the end of 2 years, you would have been through 500 repetitions of the case method. That's what we do. So what do you think ends up happening at the end of 500 such repetitions? I'm sorry? It becomes habit. So what's the habit that you've developed, Diego?
Problem solving.
Sorry?
Problem solving.
There's a problem-solving habit, and if you look at the nature of managerial work, what's the nature of managerial work? It's just literally a series of problems that come at you, right? So part of what we've done is that we've simulated in a very powerful way the nature of managerial work, because work comes at you in a series of problems. What else do you get very good at doing? You inevitably learn, just by virtue of the case method, that you're not going to, in any organizational setting, you have to work with other people. Right? So collaboration is inherently built into the case method. What else? Communication. In a typical business meeting, if you were to do a video recording of any business meeting, how much time does the person who is ostensibly the leader of the meeting have to speak? Couple of minutes. It's actually quite extraordinary. Even the CEO, in a meeting of a CEO's top leadership team, will not speak for more than a couple of minutes at a time. They may speak in total for about 20 minutes over the context of 90 minutes, but they will not speak for more than 2 minutes at a time. And what are we training our people to do? That's what they learn how to do. 2 minutes, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes of being able to convince and compel other people to think about something that you want to think about. So when you talk to our alumni 30, 40 years later, they think about the case method as much more developing a meta capability than the specifics of any case or any conceptual framework that they learned. But they do learn they do learn frameworks, they do learn things, they do learn stuff like that. So it's an extraordinarily powerful method, which not only teaches you what you would hope that education would teach you, best practice, examples of cases, understanding of the complexities associated with decision making, but it also has these side benefits of this meta capability. So here's where we're trying to now take this method next. 5 years ago, we had two of our colleagues in typical Harvard Business School fashion, Srikant Datar and David Garvin, go out and they wrote cases on 7 other business schools. So we said we were going to understand what's going on in other business schools. So they wrote cases, and we were blown away, by the way, that people who you might think of as our competitors were all quite delighted to have us write cases on them. So we wrote cases in Chicago and Yale and Stanford and even places that were not business schools, Center for Creative Learning. So we went out and we wrote cases on INSEAD to understand what places that were trying to do multiple campuses were looking like. So we went out and we wrote all of these cases. And then we studied about 200 business schools more broadly to try and ask the question, what is the current state of business education and what's missing? What is it that we think are we doing right, and what do we think is missing? And they came up with a very simple framework that we have found very compelling, and that some of the changes that I'm going to describe to you are designed to, in some ways, address. What they said is that business education has become very good in by the way, all business schools have the same mission statement, is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. That's ours. You can add a few modifiers anywhere, but all of them say exactly the same thing. So we're not like that different from anybody else. But if you think about the act of leadership, what people said is that the 3 words that they came up with is that you can think about knowing what it means to be a leader and what it takes to be a leader in the business context, translating that knowing into doing. Because as we know from a lot of research that has been done, particularly by Pfeffer and Sutton at Stanford, they describe what is called the knowing-doing gap. That there's actually a big gap between what people think they know and when they actually have to put things in practice. So we all know that we should give feedback. We all know that we should act in particular ways with teams. But when we actually try and implement it, we are very far removed from being able to act on what we know we ought to be able to do. And then they described a third gap, which is the gap between doing and being. that there's the experience people have of who you are as a leader. It's being a leader, and people relate to that. And a lot of people have no capacity to know how they are being experienced by others. Right? So it's not just what they do, but the experience they have in the lives of others, which is vital to leadership, because people will either embrace you or not, depending upon the experience you create in them, whether you inspire them, whether you make them believe that you can be trusted. These are very important features that you need to have in terms of being a leader that enable you to be successful. And so they found that there's also this big gap between doing and being, which is I'm doing the stuff, but I have no idea actually how I'm being experienced and what my being of a leader is. So we have been asking ourselves the question, how can we do better in terms of doing and being, right? Because our system, while it's very good at knowing and cultivating knowing, and is not bad at doing, it's not quite the same as doing, right? Because we're still putting you in the imagination of what you need to do as a leader. So here's what we're coming up with. In addition to the case method, we're going to create something that we call the field method, which is a complement to the case method. The goal is that today in the case method, we have students in 90% classrooms for the most part, or large classrooms. Here we're going to put students in the field. We'll actually put them in contact with reality rather than bringing reality to them in the form of a case. In teams of varying sizes, but the median size would be about 6. They will be the protagonist. So it's no longer the case that you have to say, imagine if you were Nitin, what would you do? Now you are Nitin. Go out and do. So the doing becomes much more real. They're presented with a scenario, and they must take action. And then reflect so that they know how they were experienced, so that they develop a better sense of what it means to be a leader. So what we're trying to do is, in many ways, create this cycle of thinking, doing, and reflecting as a way to now enhance the capacity of translating knowing into doing and doing into being as a leader. Our hope is that our students, by the time they graduate, we certainly can't get them to be in 500 doing situations. But we're hoping that they will be in at least 10 different doing situations by the time they graduate from Harvard Business School. Now, if you think about a typical consulting firm, it takes at least 4 or 5 years by the time you've finished 10 different assignments, or if you're an investment bank or any one of these things. So we're trying to compress very much as we were trying to do with the case method. We're trying to compress these doing cycles in the context of our education as well. So I want to emphasize that the idea is not to replace the case method. The case method will very much be the core of what we do. It's to complement it with the field method. Let me give you a concrete example that will show you what I mean by this thing, so that I can translate the conceptual vocabulary into something real. So we're going to introduce a new course in our first year curriculum called Field. Field will be a course that runs in parallel to all 10 of our traditional first year courses. And in this course, students will be asked to work in various teams as the year unfolds. By the way, we learned that nobody wants to work in a single team because it could be the team from hell. So it's very important, and nor in life do you only work with one team. So we're actually trying to create opportunities for people to learn from working in multiple teams. So here's an example of what they'll do. In the first year, in the fall semester, our students learn about marketing. So they learn about concepts like value creation, market segmentation, understanding consumers. They have a technology and operations management course where they learn about the new product development process. They have a business government and the international economy course in which they learn about countries and macroeconomic policies of different countries. So now we're going to give them this one team exercise in which they're going to do. It's a global immersion experience. All 900 of our students will go on a global immersion. Okay? So students will be created in teams of 6. They will be assigned one company and one country in an emerging market. So they will go to 12 different locations around the world. For that company in that market, they have to develop an idea for a new product or service that that company can introduce in that market. So it's a very specific assignment. All assignments have the same quality. We're not giving them whatever the company chooses as the problem. All companies that want to work with us have to, in fact, define the same problem, which is what new product or service are you going to introduce into that country. So they'll work with 150 different companies because 6 students, we have 900 students, so in all parts of the world, we'll have people go. By the way, a faculty member will accompany 6 or 7 such teams in each country. So we'll have one faculty member assigned to 6 or 7 such teams. Before the students go to the country, they will have developed a hypothesis for the product or service they want to introduce. Now, they will learn cases like IDEO in their classroom. They will learn cases on market segmentation. So they will have learned a lot of cases. But then through those cases, they will have to develop an idea for what product or service, a hypothesis for what they might introduce in a country. Then they're going to go to the country for 10 days. And while they're in country, they have to design themselves. What will they do to test the hypothesis that they had? Do I want to talk to customers? Do I want to meet people in the distribution channel? Do I want to meet customers? So you have to design yourself what you want to do when you're in country and then test your hypothesis. Now, our goal in this is not to make people know a country well. It is impossible to imagine that in 10 days you're going to learn China or India or Vietnam. Our goal in this is to cultivate what I think of as contextual intelligence or contextual humility, which is to recognize that whatever your idea is today, as a leader who now has to operate in a new global century, you need to be contextually sensitive to whatever it is that you're likely to encounter in another country. And because our view is that we don't want to just educate people about China. They may not do business in China. Tomorrow they may have to do business in Vietnam, or they may have to do business in Africa. So what's the point of getting them to become in-depth experts in one country? The real thing that we have to prepare them for is global intelligence, and this contextual intelligence that we hope to cultivate through this kind of program. So that's what is one example. Another example of what we're going to do, which is the third project that they will do, is that borrowing from the lean startup movement that is now taking place in California, all of our students will actually have to build a real venture that they can launch in 8 weeks. Okay? Now you might think, I mean, these can only be toy ventures, 8 weeks. It doesn't matter if it's a toy venture. The thing that we want our students to be able to experience is under time pressure and resource constraints, what can you build in 8 weeks with another group of people? We expect 1/3 of the people to fail, at least, to even get something launched. Those who fail will have one of two choices, either to be recruited by one of their surviving teams, or if not, to become students of one of the surviving teams. They will have to write cases on the surviving teams. I give you these as just 2 examples to show that in addition to this knowing, doing, being movement that we're trying to cultivate, because the key for us will be to create a method around this. Right? In the end, the reason why the case method works is not that there are cases, but there's a method. There's a particular kind of case that makes it a good case. There's a particular way in which a conversation has to unfold in a class that makes learning from the case method viable. If you go to a badly taught case discussion, I promise you, you'll learn nothing. Right? In the same way, we believe that these field method experiences have to be similarly structured, and we will learn over time by doing many of these. And this is where we leverage the great strength of our business school. We will run these things at scale. There's 150 of these things that we're going to do all the time. So we can learn just as we learn from the case method, and my hope is that in 5, 7, 8 years, we would have begun to define what we can think of as a method, a way of designing these field experiments in a way that students can extract extraordinary learning out of these things. So this is what we're going to do. In the first year course, there are going to be these 3 themes that we'll have them do. In the second year, we're going to introduce a whole series of electives that also leverage case method and field method components. This is just details. So here's the, so in the first year, you'll get a chance to do both these things so that you can develop some practice, some core capability in doing all of these things. And in the second year, you'll get many, many more chances to engage in reps, which is very much what we try and do today in our program with the case method. Among the innovations that we are currently contemplating is a space. How many of you have been to a case method classroom? All of you have, right? So you know what it looks like. It looks like this amphitheater with places where you can run up and down the aisles. By the way, that physical classroom architecture that you all take for granted was invented at Harvard Business School. It's an architecture that has been copied everywhere in the world. And it's an extraordinarily important architecture to have physical architecture to have as a complement to a case discussion. Try and run a case in a flat classroom. And you'll immediately notice the difference between a case method being run in that kind of environment versus a real case classroom. So in the same spirit, we have created a new architecture, which we're experimenting with, which borrows from a beehive. So just like if you think about what activity we're now trying to encourage our students to do, we're trying to encourage them to engage in hives of collaborative teamwork. And so the instructor will be in the sort of middle of this beehive, and we have this new building called the Harvard Innovation Lab. If I had more time, I would tell you about this innovation too, which is the second great innovation that we're trying to launch, which is to create something called the Harvard Innovation Lab. On the second floor, we have, so this is the new architecture of our classroom. It looks like a hive. It has a form factor of an oval. And in it, you can configure classrooms in infinitely different ways, oriented to the center of the room. So our view is that the instructor, as opposed to being in the front, will now be in the center of the room. And you can have teams work as teams. You can have teams reconfigure in very flexible ways. We've thought very hard about the acoustics of the space, very much like a sports arena. All of the electronic stuff will just roll all around the classroom, right? So you know what I'm talking about? These banners, the electronic banners that run across. Now with LED, that turns out to be pretty relatively inexpensive to do. So we're kind of playing around with these classrooms, and that's the last thing I wanted to share with you. So this is one of the experiments. The program starts this fall, so at least in 1 year, what I can tell you is, and the buildings will start on September 1 as well. So from nothing, we will have built 10 classrooms that look like this in our first year at Harvard Business School. So we're an old, stodgy, established institution. We will see whether any of this ultimately works, but for now, this is our next push in terms of where we are trying to take management education. Happy to answer any questions or whatever else you want to talk about. Joe. How much time do we have?
We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah. It sounds so exciting, I must say, and you're infectious in presenting it, so thank you for that. I'm just curious, what percentage of students are engaged in social entrepreneurship programs, and what differences in terms of their educational experience do they have?
So now we have, last year, this entering class, 8% of our entering students come from social entrepreneurship, directly. 8%. So that may look like a small number till you realize it's 72 students, which is half the size of Yale's program. So I mean, the benefit that we have with scale is that a number like 10% is actually a big number. Now, last year, 9% of our students graduated, and the first job that they took after they graduated from Harvard Business School was some form of social enterprise. Right? So this has clearly become an important sector in the Harvard Innovation Lab that I was just mentioning to you. This is a space that we're creating where all of Harvard University can come from any part of the university to connect with each other, to think about new innovations that they can do. Because my theory of this change is very simple. I believe that the game of content is not one that we at Harvard Business School can win anymore. Everybody else who's creating all these things that are on the web will win the content game. My faculty members are already available. You want Clay Christensen? Tomorrow he's going to be available on the University of Phoenix. Mike Porter will be available next. So if you just wanted great lectures by the great instructors in the world, I don't think that that's a game that I have any prayer of winning. So the only thing that I can do is to create great experience that people can only have in the co-presence of other remarkable people. And I have to keep raising the bar for what does that look like? What does it look like that you can only get if you're in the presence of other remarkable people at Harvard? And if I can't keep pushing that envelope out, I will ultimately be disintermediated by everybody else who's doing all this other stuff in the room. So my kind of at least underlying theory of all of this is that we've got to push in the direction of things that we can uniquely do at Harvard and at Harvard Business School. Yes?
Nitin, this is probably more of a comment than a question, but I'm sure you're going to have some comments on it, picking up on your last statement. What struck me as remarkable about your presentation, and it's a corollary to Joel's presentation this morning, is the amount of time you spend on the how as opposed to what, or the process as opposed to the content, as you just characterized it. And what also strikes me even further than that is the business leader that is probably amongst the most revered, if not the most revered on planet Earth today, Steve Jobs, who is not formally educated with any content, remarked many years ago at Carnegie Mellon, he says, you know, my education came when I was in India and I walked along the Ganges. The journey was the reward. Yeah. That was the actual content. I wonder if you might want to pick up on why, apart from competitive advantage, why that is so important in your opinion to the learning systems and processes you're describing.
So I think that, I mean, it's interesting that you picked that up. I always say that we have no innovation in what here. The what problem of what we are doing, there are 1,000 examples of people who are doing field studies, consulting studies. So the field method that we've talked about here, I mean, there's nothing new about that. I mean, as you rightly point out, there's 1,000 examples of this going on around the world as we speak. If we are going to create anything new, it will be the process. Our success will lie in creating an extraordinary process that will extract every ounce of learning that is possible from these field studies. Because I can tell you today that in the average field study, and we have some today at Harvard Business School, so in our second year of the curriculum, people can sign up with a faculty member, and it is a random draw of luck, whether you have a learning experience or whether you have a freebie experience. Right? Because depending upon the person whom you're working with, they might meet you or not, they might challenge you or not, they might do a whole bunch of things or not. Whereas in the case method, I promise you, you will not come to a classroom at Harvard Business School in which you will not feel stretched and challenged and pushed. Because you will be cold called, you will be challenged, I will be in your face, I'm going to do all these things. Now, how did I learn that? I learned that because it was taught to me. It was a method that I learned for 5 years by virtue of being a professor at Harvard Business School. That's what I want to focus on. To me, innovations in the teaching process, which extract out of any teaching experience or any learning experience, the greatest learning for the faculty members and for the students, we pay too little attention to that. Our minds are always focused on the what and not on the how. I actually think that the devil, as in all things in life, lies in the details. And if you figure that out, you create an edge. That's our edge at Harvard Business School. It's always been. And if I'm going to have any success with this, it's because we will permanently be pushing that edge of how. How do we make this better? How do I make sure that students leave every one of these teaching encounters, or at least many of them, and say, wow, that just rewired my mind. I now know something about how to work with other people and work with myself in a completely different way. Right?
But I think we'll take these three and then
we'll be done, right? I promise you.
So Gordon, Adrian, Karen.
Gordon, would you like to go?
Oh, did I do that again? I'm sorry, Patrick. Excuse me. No. Patrick.
What brought a big smile on my face, and one thing I didn't mention to the group earlier, is that I founded my own international school in Tokyo called Tokyo International School, and it's a K-8. A lot of the things that you're doing here, I have elementary school students and middle school students.
Yeah, this is what Karen is doing. This is
exactly. Yeah. So we've connected before. And so why are we not doing this? We talk about different models and things like that, and what education should look like. I'm not saying every student should look like they're coming out of Harvard Business School, but in a sense, when we talk about the practical applications, we talk about processes, we talk about methods, we talk about not the what, but the how.
Yeah.
And really, I think you hit it right on the nose in my eyes. I guess a question I have from you is that I've been noticing the trends along some of the business schools or design schools is a master in fine arts has become much more popular, and I've seen business schools make the shift in that direction as well. So you've talked about innovation, but you didn't really talk about design or the design processes that are involved. And I think they're kind of intertwined, but...
So we are not yet sure what to do there. So that's why we're creating in Harvard Innovation Lab a space in which we will allow our students to interact with people from all parts of the university, including people from the design school, including people from FAS. So we're creating in addition to traditional entrepreneurship, which we care about greatly, business entrepreneurship, which will always be the heart and core of what we do. Social entrepreneurship has become a very large component of what we do. But we're also launching cultural entrepreneurship as a category, in which we're asking the question, how can people take culture of various kinds, art, food. So here, right here in Spain, Ferran Adria, the Eboli guy, he's going to be at Harvard next year, and we at Harvard Business School will have a contest for our students to ask themselves what the next great restaurant needs to look like, because that's what he wants to do over the next 2 years, and he's going to create a global contest to do that. So we're pushing entrepreneurship in all these new directions, and hopefully out of that, we'll discover what it might be as a productive way for us to engage with design. So today I must say that I don't know what that looks like, so I want to just create the space for some spontaneous experimentation to be done. I have learned that students are the best experimenters. That if you want to see innovation occur, get out of the way of students. They will do things, but they don't know quite what they've done. Then the job of the teachers after they have done it is to build upon what they've done and to truly leverage and systematize that. So that's what at least my hope is. Yeah.
Actually, why don't we do this? Let's hear both of the questions.
Yeah, and then I'll respond, because otherwise my response.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about the cost implications of this, because the rate of inflation of higher education has been very fast, well above the level of general inflation, above the level of medical inflation. MBA inflation has been one of the worst in that whole area. What Harvard does has huge implications. What other people do, as you said, with the case method, is spread around the rest of the world. It strikes me that you're inventing here a formula for making MBA education even more expensive than it has been before, as the rest of the world picks it up. And it also strikes me it's very interesting that innovation coming from higher education all seems to be about making things more inaccessible and more expensive. Can we get a few innovations that are about putting Michael Porter online and making everything actually cheaper? Just to get a sense of rent seeking here.
So I think that...
I'm sorry, Nathan, let's hear
Karen's
question. Yeah.
Okay, you talked about the think and the do phase, but you didn't say very much about the reflect initiative. So what will be done for that phase to help students really reflect on the field experience and on the case studies and what they've learned during the process?
So in terms of the cost, Adrian, my view of this is that there are many other people other than Harvard Business School that are engaged in models to make the cost of higher education more accessible. So I deeply believe that University of Phoenix and others, if they survive the current crisis in which they find themselves, and by the way, some of the things that are going on in places like the University of Phoenix horrify me. The fact that people are going into debt to take an education which promises them an opportunity at the other side, but actually has no quality to deliver that to them, is an even worse lie than what we say, where at least we say you're going to offer, you're going to be charged $60,000, but I guarantee you on the other side that there'll be a real return. There are many, many places in the world that are today offering people something that is the seduction of education, without actually delivering any of the opportunities that education is supposed to deliver on the other side. And people are in debt, people take loans. I can show you many, many examples of such forms of abuse that have been documented at places like the University of Phoenix. So we should be very careful about not just celebrating these examples as ways in which, because there are almost risks of a subprime crisis type of problem that we might have in terms of how this education is being sold to unsuspecting people. So at least I would, as a great celebrator and as a great believer in that model of democratizing education, I would have people in this room who are giddy with excitement about this, so at least look hard to ask the question, what actually happens at the coal face of those models? Some of them are not as pretty as you might imagine. What will this do to our model? Yes, the cost will go up. Can this be scaled? So what we are offering can only be scaled at high cost. I completely agree with you. So what am I trying to protect? I'm unabashed about it. I'm trying to protect the experience that the people who are the top 1,000 people will want. Because if all that my experience ends up being is listening to Mike Porter, they will not come to me anymore. So I have to create something that is the next bar for what people like that care about. I don't think that there'll be one form of education for all. The education market, like every other market, will be segmented. I don't play to every segment in the world. I have no desire to play to every segment in the world. I play for a very specific segment. That's the segment that I want to be focused on. And I promise you that if we deliver this, the best people in the world, I still think, will still want to come to Harvard. That's the game that I'm in. And I'm not confused about which other game I'm in. So I have no desire to play any other game other than the game that I know how to play. Karen, to your point on the being side, at the end of every rep, students will have to engage in very thoughtful reflection, all the way from diary keeping to having people give honest feedback to each other. We don't know how much we can get in terms of people being really raw and naked there. That's why I think that the method part will be important. Like we've learned in the case method how to extract things from people. We don't know yet how to extract all of that from people in terms of reflections and talking about each other. But that's our goal. Our goal is to have that reflect cycle be as important as the do cycle. And every one of these loops will have a reflect cycle built into it as much as the do cycle. But if you ask me where is the greatest work to be done in terms of method, I actually think the doing part we'll learn how to do quite easily. The reflection part is where I think that in terms of cracking the code on what the right method is, that's my sense of where the biggest journey lies. Let me end on that note by saying that the one place in terms of being that I continue to struggle the most with, I think business leaders and leaders in general suffer a lot from intellectual overconfidence, right? So if you ask people in a room, what's your IQ, and you say the average IQ in the room is 130, everybody believes that theirs is higher. This has been done repeatedly, by the way, in most cases. I think an even greater form of overconfidence is moral overconfidence. The vast majority of people don't think that they're ever going to do anything that is evil or bad, or they will not be tempted. They're even more confident about their own sense of righteousness than they are about their own intellect. And I don't think in education we have even begun to scratch the surface of understanding how we can cultivate moral humility. So one of the other things that we're thinking very hard about at Harvard Business School is how in the process of what we do we start to cultivate and actually educate people to have real moral humility, because I can tell you moral development is a lifelong process just as much as intellectual development is. And if we don't solve that problem, we will forever be disappointed by the leaders we educated, as have we in recent times. So thank you very much for your patience, and look forward to the rest of our conversations.
Thank you, Nitin.
Thank you.
So we're going to take a coffee break. We are